All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Summer Serpis. I'm the Assistant Director of CAP, and I will be the facilitator today. So our focus today in our webinar series is supporting English learners in mainstream transfer level composition. And I will say a little bit more about that in a minute and introduce our panelists. So this webinar is part of a webinar series. This is the second webinar in our series, and it is built around our October 2022 issue of the CAPacity Gazette. And Rebecca, if you could drop that link in the chat for me to the publication. We had a webinar series last year that inspired this publication, and then the publication inspired another round of webinars. So we've kind of come full circle on these ideas here. And our last webinar will be on December 2nd, and that's going to be an AB 705 research update. So we'll have folks from the RP group and folks from PPIC sharing the latest research on English language learners. Okay, sorry, trying to juggle my screen here. Give me just a second. Okay. Okay, so we have 4 panelists here with us today. So I'm going to introduce them by sharing a little bit about the information that is shared about their programs in the CAPacity Gazette. So if you want to know more details about any of these programs, they are all featured in our latest edition of the CAPacity Gazette. So our first presenter is Jessica Pardoe, and she's from Santa Rosa College. And that article that we looked at is looking at their transfer level English composition course that is specifically designated for English learners. The course that they share in the publication is focused on analyzing different genres. And it's not genres like we might think of typically in composition, like comparison and contrast or narrative, but students are looking at genres that they encounter in the workplace, in school. So they look at things like the 5-paragraph essay, workplace memos, emails, those kinds of things. And in the class, they investigate those genres, analyze those genres, critique the genres. What I found really interesting was it seems like such a great skill to help students learn that can translate to other places. They can use this in other classes. You know, if we understand, I'm looking at the genre of a scientific report or something along those lines. So it's a really good translatable skill that the students are learning in those classes. Our next presenter is Nicole Siminsky, and she is from Palomar College. The course that we feature in the publication from Palomar is an ESL course that we would probably traditionally call pre-transfer, but it's not pre-transfer because it earns transfer credit, but it earns transfer credit in the humanities, and that is transferable to both the Cal States and the UCs. So students are doing reading and writing that's focused on humanities topics. For example, Nicole teaches a unit on accent bias. And then the language learning is woven into the instruction of the humanities course. So students are getting credit in another area while they move through the composition sequence. A PPIC study in 2019 noted that students are 16 percentage points more likely to complete transfer level English composition within 3 years when compared to colleges where ESL coursework is not transferable. So this is a high leverage strategy that can support students in ESL. Next, we have Rebecca Beck from Irvine Valley College, which is my college as well. Irvine Valley offers a transfer level English composition section with an ESL co-requisite attached. So it's the same as the transfer level composition course that all students take, but the co-requisite support class is designated as ESL. Rebecca and I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and Rebecca will share that link in the chat if you'd like to check it out. We were highlighting this course and the curriculum that we use to teach it. In this class, the transfer level English comp is exactly the same in both the courses, but one has the ESL co-req, and then the one I teach has just the traditional support co-requisite course. And then last, we have Jose Cortes from Solano College. Jose co-wrote the article in the in the publication called Across the False Divide with Melissa Reeve, who is also a CAP ESL coach. Jose and Melissa have been CAP ESL coaches for many years, and they've brought a unique perspective because they both teach in both ESL and English. In the article, Jose and Melissa share what they learned from tracking students from ESL to and through transfer level composition. So they found by looking at 3 case studies of students where they looked at their writing over the course of multiple classes, that language acquisition is continuous, incremental, and context specific. And so if you look at that article, you can see those case studies and look at writing samples and see how students' writing evolved over that, over the time that they were looking at their writing. Okay, so all of these panelists that I've introduced have previous webinars that have been done that highlight these programs. So if you want to look at those, you can look at the publication that Rebecca shared, and there are links to the different webinars that you can learn more information about those programs. Okay, so we, you know, as I said, we've talked about these programs in previous webinars. We've talked about them in the CAPacity Gazette. Our goal here today is to really think about how these experts can help mainstream English instructors support English learners in their courses. So I have a quote here that's from our publication, and it says, even with these tailored options, many English learners will still choose to enroll in the standard transfer level English composition course, and English faculty may need additional training to better serve them. According to Jose Cortes, an instructor of English and ESL at Solano College and a panelist today, there is a population of English learners who will not enroll in a course labeled as ESL because of a perceived stigma, and intentional support from an English composition instructor will help support this population. So with AB 705 and 1705, we see many students who need varying degrees of language support entering directly into our mainstream transfer level English. And you know, I think we really always have, right? This isn't a new population in our classes. We might be seeing a little more, but that population has always been in our class. And so I think a lot of us who teach the mainstream English composition courses are looking for ways to support those students. So today we're calling on these experts to help us think through strategies that we can use, that we can pull over from ESL instruction to support our English learners in these classes. So we're going to start today with brief presentations from each panelist, who will be sharing strategies that they think we can use in our transfer level English, our mainstream transfer level English composition courses. So each panelist will present one strategy that they think answers this question: what is one strategy you think English instructors can use to support English learners in mainstream composition courses? So I am going to turn it over to Nicole for the first presentation.
Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole. I come from Palomar College. The strategy that I want to share with you all is how I notice the language activities and try to treat all activities like my students are language detectives in order to find language that they can use themselves, but also in order to better understand reading and better approach a new reading. So some background really fast, if you want to go to the next slide. So some background is I like to think of it as rhetorical grammar, and Roberta Ching has a really good good information and good toolkit on rhetorical grammar about activities that are focused on accomplishing rhetorical purposes, looking at language and how it actually serves a certain purpose. So my goal is to make sure that students feel comfortable approaching a new reading, that they have a confidence to approach readings from different genres, but also from different fields, and really to do it autonomously. I want them to feel like they can self-scaffold, because when I give scaffolding of my own, it kind of does a disservice when they move into another class if they don't have the same kind of scaffolding. So I want them to learn how to self-scaffold. And of course, this is wonderful in terms of UDL, because this isn't just for language learners. really even monolingual English speakers, depending on their register, if they don't have, basic sentence analysis or basic skills in sentence analysis, how can they analyze more advanced or sophisticated sentence structures in order to use in their own writing? And so this is good for transferring into other fields. And I told the panelists that a couple weeks ago, a former student came back from her microbiology class and told me that it started out with a lot of science, but then she's now reading articles on microbiology and responding to the articles. So she said, I don't know how my science class turned into my English class, but she used a lot of these kind of language detective strategies in order to approach the reading. So I'll go ahead and show you what I mean. So my goal is automaticity. And like Summer shared, I teach a unit on accent bias. And so I try to have similar topics and themes in the articles, but then the articles get progressively more difficult. So the first one is in the New York Times, the next one's in Forbes magazine, and then the final one is an article from the Chronicle of Higher Education, an academic journal. So I want them to practice the same kind of approaches to the reading and then just layer it as they get to more advanced texts. You can go to the next one. So when we're reading, we go through, typical reading routines, finding clues from context, and then what I'll share with you today are clues, language clues that can help them prepare for the reading. And then, of course, reading without judgment and reading with judgment. And so the first language clue that usually gets a laugh from the students is I ask students to find big but sentences. I ask them to find sentences that start with a coordinating conjunction like and or but, and ask them, what can you predict about the author's main ideas based on these sentences? And it does it lends itself to a quick discussion about coordinating conjunctions and the function of coordinating conjunctions. So I'll give them the article and have them skim the article to try and find sentences that start with a big but or a big and. And if you can skip, or if you can go to the next one. So here in the Agudo article published in the New York Times, they may find the sentence at the end of the paragraph that says, but we do need to set aside the illusion that there is a single true and authentic way to speak. So I might ask the students, have you heard that you can't start a sentence with but? And many people say they have heard that rule that they can't start a sentence with but. And so I ask, did he forget that rule? Does he not know that rule? And of course, we get to a point where they understand that this must be a sentence of some significance. If the author is going to interrupt our reading with starting a sentence with a coordinating conjunction, which isn't typically, or which is a traditional against the standard grammar rules, then he must be drawing our attention. So even without reading the text, we can pull this sentence and start doing some analysis here. What does it mean? What words do they need to know? Take notes and make a prediction on his purpose or his claim. And so they'll do some margin notes there. And if you want to move to the next one. Another example I do is with subordination. So I admit that I used to teach, sentence variety by saying, where's the dependent, where's the independent, do you have the comma, let's go. But when I try to teach that independent clauses actually hold more significance, I realized that this could also be another way to draw students' attention to clues in the text about the author's claim. So I might tell them, Miracosta has a great cafeteria, but Palomar College has a great library. Which one is my favorite? And hopefully they don't know. Food, books, it doesn't tell. But when I switch and say, even though Miracosta has a great cafeteria, Palomar College has a great library, now intuitively they know that my favorite is Palomar College. So we transfer that into sentences from the article that they can then pull and focus on the independent clause as a clue to the author's claim. So if you go to the next one, we have this is the more difficult article, the Heidi Landecker article from the Chronicle of Higher Education. And they can see the while. I'll tell them to search for any of those, even though, although, or while. And once we parse the sentence a little, we can find the independent clause and then make predictions about her purpose. So without even reading the article, we have this huge clue, and they'll have notes so that when they're reading, they're not reading cold. They already have these kinds of clues for them as they read. This is a bonus one too, because it also starts with an and, so they might see that there's double emphasis here for this particular claim. If you go to the next one. The last one I want to show you is the proper nouns. Now, not for meaning, but this is for them to start making predictions about the kinds of evidence and start doing that kind of critical thinking work about who is the audience for this particular article. So if you go to the next one, I have an example of, I have them just go through quickly and just circle proper nouns they see, and not necessarily make a list, but think about what kind of proper nouns they have. So in this one, they see it's a lot of TV shows and pop culture. And then in the next one, they'll see that it's a lot of research. You can go to the next one. There's a lot of research and programs and professors and experts. So we can start thinking about how they have similar claims, but their evidence is different. And maybe they're reaching a different audience, and what can they anticipate before they read? This actually works in the reverse also, because if you go to the next one, you'll see that in the Forbes, there's very few proper nouns. So we might make predictions that we'll see a lot of personal experience or whatnot in that final one. Perfect, we can skip. So now I don't front load all of that to them right away. So if I'm looking at my goal of getting them from being a reader to a researcher, I'll give a few texts and do one language notice activity. So my orange ones would be one at a time. The first text I might do proper nouns, and then the next one we might do big but sentences. And then by the time they get to the green, which was the accent bias unit, then I might have them jigsaw and say, like, you guys look for big buts, you guys look for proper nouns, and then come together and share your predictions. And the goal really is then by the time they get to their blue articles, when they are doing their own research and they go through the databases and find their own articles, that they have this kind of bank of language clues. Some articles might have buts, some might have subordination, and they can kind of self-scaffold for what they need in order to prepare for the text. And then the last one, the last slide. So then these, again, I don't give this at the beginning, but as we move through, I'll start kind of collecting different language clues that we did in class and put them into a bank that they can take with them to future classes as their way of self-scaffolding. And that is my strategy for you.
All right,
Hopefully,
thank you so. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, hopefully it helps you and all of your language detectives too.
Thank you. So one thing I probably should have said before is we are kind of moving through the reading and writing process. So thank you, Nicole, for sharing this kind of pre-reading strategy. And now we're going to hand it over to Jose to look at a close reading strategy.
Hey, everybody. I'm going to be talking through, as Summer said, a close reading strategy to kind of think about, some of the helpful things that we can do when we're asking students to read through the text multiple times, right? Like that's one of the ideas that I stress that I know, all of us do, right? Is this idea of like reading through something more than one time, but then also kind of giving specific purpose when we're reading through something maybe for the second, third, or fourth time potentially, and we're choosing little sections of text to close read. What are some different things that we might be able to do the second time through reading a text than maybe we did the first time? What are some different areas that we can pay a little bit closer attention for some reader strategies to really help us get to some deeper understanding of a text that we might not have been able to get on the surface level reading of the text? So when I think about drawing inference for students in a reading and arriving to a deeper understanding of a text, I've always liked this definition of inference that I heard of just like kind of thinking about it like from almost like a mathematical equation, right? Where it's like you have your evidence plus your schema equals your inference. And I think that this really speaks to this idea of like this kind of transactional reading theory, like who we are and what we bring to a text and what our schema is matters to the reading process. And I think this is especially important for when we're looking at multilingual students in a mainstream context, right? And be able to think about like, one individual's life experiences or the schemata that somebody brings to a text is going to be different than the person's next to them, and kind of think about that of changing that dynamic a little bit and looking at some potential strengths. But with that idea, it can be easy to be able to say, well, just because the evidence is there, if the schema is missing, right, and if that understanding of the evidence or the ability to have the deeper understanding of the evidence, then missing that important piece might not be able to lead to the inference. So one of the things that I try to stress is like being mindful, and to remind myself of that also, like always being mindful of the need to build schema for people throughout the process of a class, right? And so this might be in a situation where we're thinking about like recent or current events, right? To be able to kind of hear something and maybe do a little bit of digging a bit to have some schema built on that. This could be especially important for non-native English speakers who are not American born, maybe some of whom just recently moved to the country. Thinking about elements of American history. And then also I think cultural references, right, are really important. And I did know that from just that experience of like trying to make some sort of joke or reference in class, and like this falls very flat. And I'm like, oh yeah, well, maybe it's a schema issue, right? Because the things that I'm referencing, the more and more I just don't want to admit it, are feeling older and older, right? So like they're falling a little bit flat in situations. And so I think this is important, not just for non-native English speakers, but also for our mainstream English students, right? Like, you know, a lot of times when we're thinking about things like references or allusions, you know, age is such a massive part of that, right? And region. And I think this is also really important for us. You know, it's like, there's so many times where students will be having conversations, or, you know, I'll be reading about an idea in a paper, or they'll kind of be brainstorming through different ideas, or especially when we get into research project season, right? Where I'm like, I have my own work to do to build my schema, right? Because the references they're making, the conversations they're having, a lot of that is very foreign to me too. So I think it's important just all around the class, this is constantly something we're working towards. So this activity is kind of built on the idea of analyzing allusions as a mean to be able to arrive to a close reading. So, you know, kind of go through it. I'll show you an example of the activity that we do in class, but it starts with defining allusions and kind of introducing some of the different types of allusions, whether they be historical or literary or cultural or religious. And I think that, you know, showing a bunch of different examples. And one of the ways that I try to start this in class is find very kind of common types of references that might be used, but then also provide pretty accessible examples, right? Some of which people might have the schema for, some of which they may not. And then also kind of like start that modeling process, right? Like after providing some simple examples of allusions that we tend to use regularly, talk about the significance, right? That if somebody did not have the schema for maybe the specific word that's used, and one of the things that I like to talk about in class when I introduce this is kind of giving the contrast between like my schema and my Mama Rosa, who's my grandmother's schema, right? And if I were to bring my Mama Rosa, looks like, if you're familiar with the movie Coco, right? Mama Coco and my Mama Rosa, I think are kind of like built off of each other. I think Mama Rosa might have a little bit of copyright infringement lawsuit on her hands. But if I bring her into the classroom, there's certain conclusions that she's not able to come to, because not she doesn't have the evidence in front of her, but because her schema is significantly different from mine. And similarly, when I have conversations with her, there's a lot of conclusions that I'm not able to come to, and the things that we're talking about, because my schema is very different from hers. So being able to show different examples of places where kind of dispelling the idea that somehow one could you view it as a deficiency to maybe not feel like they're able to pull out key ideas from a text, but instead maybe view it as a strength of this idea that like each person's unique experiences provides them unique perspective to a text. So I'll start with some different examples. And kind of start with that example of my grandmother, and thinking about a very different experiences that two people could come into a reading with, and then model some of those later on, moving into authentic text and kind of starting to have that conversation about like when we're close reading, maybe not everything is worthy of our close reading, and we could sometimes skip over references and still feel like we can understand it. I'll show you an example in a second, but then also understand that if we kind of like, you know, slow down a little bit and kind of like pump the brakes and take the time to read through something and dig around a little bit, that we can arrive to a deeper understanding than we've been able to. And then really after practicing, you know, in the simple examples, thinking about using authentic text to find and define allusions in order to be able to reach a more critical reading. So here's an example that I like to start with. And like, even right now, if I look at this, like if right now somebody said, hey, there's a Salt and Straw right next to you, or hey, Jose, let's go, I would just like turn my camera off and then like do the rest of this through just my AirPods, because like this is my absolute kryptonite, right? And so if I make this statement could very easily be lost without the schema of the significance of kryptonite, right? And that being something that can weaken Superman, right? Or that can weaken us if we see this temptation. And so I think that like, starting with a different example of something that people see, sometimes I give like examples of either, literary allusions in text, like for example, Jafar's parrot being named Iago in Aladdin, right? Like trying to find different examples of where we see this happening regularly, and how would that help us get to a deeper understanding of text. So in our class, we used the prologue in the first chapter to Phuc Tran's memoir, Saigon. And he writes with just a really awesome style, but he makes tons of references. In this prologue, there are allusions that range from everything from, John Hughes movies, the example that I have here, to Morrissey's Hair, to the Scarlet Letter. I mean, there's just like tons and tons of different references that happen here. So this is where I'd like to introduce this, but I think any text where we see a writer using references and allusions in a significant, meaningful context can work really well. So this example is one that I modeled when we were talking about a specific point that we wanted to make about how Tran could feel like an outcast. So in this specific example, there's two allusions that are being used, right? One is John Hughes and the other one is Frank Lloyd Wright. So in defining allusions, I think it's important that we stress this idea that you have to move beyond a simple Google definition, right? And if I looked up the Google definition by itself, it's really limiting, right? Like an American filmmaker making film in the 70s, it doesn't really help me a whole lot. But instead, if I like encourage in class, like using multiple different examples, looking around on Google, right? And to be able to pull up some pictures of two of my favorite John Hughes movies, that I could get a little bit of deeper understanding of who he is. And so now if I go back to that original quote, how does understanding who John Hughes is uncover a deeper meaning of Tran's texts? And so here, then we engage in this conversation about like, well, what would it be like for a new kid who's a refugee from Vietnam being in a school where people look like this? How does he feel being in a really homogenized population, and be able to engage in some deeper conversation there? And so this is the allusion class activity that we use. They work with groups to identify allusions in the text, copy the passage where it happens, and then do a little research, right? Use Google. We have some Chromebooks in the class, or they could use their phones. They might involve like kind of YouTubing something, but trying to find more than one-dimensional view of something, right? Like, so read a little bit about different things, find as many different kind of examples supporting this, and then finally add some analysis and how their uncovering of the meaning of this allusion helps them get to a deeper understanding of the text. So I included a sample in this next slide. And so this is an example from a group that worked, and a non-native English speaker, a student named Dang, was in that group and found this allusion where there's actually two happening here, where it references funhouse mirrors, which I think is one of those things that we can kind of easily gloss over and be like, well, everyone knows funhouse mirrors, but then also like, I don't know the last time that I've seen one of those outside of when I was like maybe 8, right? And so thinking about, here's the quote that was used, and then in their group diving into this analysis and being able to see that like through the unlocking of the funhouse mirror allusion that's being used there, like really thinking about how that impacts his reflections, seeing this other Vietnamese student move into his school and how he views himself inside versus how people view him outside from this warped perspective. So again, it kind of allowed students to get to a deeper understanding of the text than they potentially would have gotten on the first read through.
All right, thank you so much, Jose. So we looked at 2 reading strategies, and now we're going to shift over into some strategies to support English learners with writing. So I will hand it over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Summer. So as Summer mentioned, I'm coming to where we begin the reading piece of our writing process instruction. And so in looking at the instructional cycle, what I am going to share with all of you today is an activity that I do to connect reading and writing. So next slide, please. So I wanted to begin by explaining why it is so important for us to address the need that our multilingual writers or any emerging academic writers have of understanding what they are doing. I think that is half the battle. And all of us in the room who are writing instructors, we understand that, I don't know what the best word, but I'm going to use frustration. We encounter sometimes when we may feel that we have an excellent writer, yet what they wrote has nothing to do with the prompt, right? And so they come to you and they say, well, I'm not an effective writer. And so I spend time saying you are an effective writer, but we're struggling here is understanding the task, right? Because that is then what's happening. So I attached the essay, What is Academic Writing by Irvine, where this quote comes from, which is, here's the secret. Your success with academic writing depends upon how well you understand what you're doing as you write and how you approach the writing task. And so I review this with my students many a times to come back to the importance of reading the prompt carefully. So next slide, please. This is then this activity. So I have added images of my prompt. So this is a prompt for essay 2, and they receive my prompt for the essay at the beginning of the unit. And as I explained, this is then 2 weeks later, where we come back to the prompt after we have completed all the readings. We do reading activities at home, we do in-class reading activities, and then we do post-reading. So it is valuable for me then to spend time 2 weeks after I have initially began the units and the units process and the development of the essay to the prompt. And so here it is. I explain what we're gonna do. At the top, I tell them the tasks, and the tasks are to complete annotations on the prompt and to answer the 5 embedded questions. And so at this point, since I just mentioned this as essay 2, there are things that are standard. So this is the same in all my essays. This is the same in all my essays, the main goals and the text. And I always give them a little summary of at a glance, right? So what I'm sharing with you then is these questions that I have, and I will also share later how students also do annotations. So the questions relate to understanding what's in front of them. So if you look at the first question is, please read the main goals for essay 2, and based on your feedback from essay 1, which do you feel confident about in your own writing, and which do you feel are areas of growth for you? So a little bit of a metacognitive activity here as well, so that they can reflect on how they did with essay 1, how they use my comments to help them, and areas that they feel, hey, I'm doing super awesome with organization. I just need more support, maybe with cohesive devices or something. So in my example later, you'll see how students address that. Number 2, here's where some of that language support comes in. It is very important for them to understand the difference between these action verbs that we put in the prompts, because as we know, multilingual writers may not have had a clear instruction in academic vocabulary. And it's also a reality of some monolingual writers as well. And so I want them to clearly understand what develop means, what analyze means, what discuss and what explain means. And I'll share with you how some of my students have gone about that. So these are the questions then you see related to the language and the goals of the essay. Next slide, please. Then I continue with embedding other questions within the prompt. So this is the prompt, right? It's a chunk, but then I ask them, hey, can you restate it in your own words? So they read and they have the ability right there and then to send it back to me to check if what they understand the prompt to be is truly what I am asking them to do. And this is where a lot of the work that I used to do when I used to request a draft 1 is addressed, because in my past, when I was still learning how to be more effective at having them comprehend the task, I would just send a prompt. I didn't check how they understood it or what words areas they didn't understand. And I would get essays for drafts one with something altogether different. And so then I had to reevaluate, what is my role as a teacher where I'm not conveying this information effectively? Because if one student misunderstands it is one thing, but when there's 4 of them, then I need to look at what am I doing? And so again, here is the opportunity where I catch that. And here is again, where I catch many misunderstandings and I address them here instead of once they're in the essay writing step, right? And so I love question number 3. Question number 4 is related to the Writing Center and how, again, they can use the sources outside of our classroom, like the Writing Center, to help them in the process of writing. And the last question is, what else do you want to ask me? And sometimes these questions are simple as, hey, how many pages does it have to be, right? And I come back and I say, oh, you know, about 4 to 5, and I remind them again where it is in the prompt, or how do I address all of the points from the prompt in a organized way? And so I answer those questions. So this is what my prompt looks like with the embedded questions. Next slide, please. And I wanted to share with you what some of those samples look like. So here's a student's actual work. The next 3 slides are work my students have done. And I'm having you look at the annotations that they did, and then the dialogue that occurs between me and them at this stage, right? So this is a student who says, okay, these are the full name of the sources. Then here's a question, right? The student is asking me, is the sequence important? Or can I explain why human connection is important and only then the reasons of loneliness? So then I help this individual here and I address the question, and then I know that they feel confident starting the essay with the knowledge that I don't have to have the order as it's exactly in the prompt, right? Social, cultural, and evolutionary. Her question was, can I begin with evolutionary? And again, whatever I can do to help them feel more confident to begin the drafting stage, I will do, right? And so that was that. Then we have another one here. Summer, can you move the next? I forgot who was moving the slides. This one, again, it's a metacognitive little answer. The student is going off about what she feels good about, right? I feel confident about my paragraphs. I feel confident to write under pressure. And I need more support with my thesis statement. And so again, I'm kind of going back to them and saying, I'm happy, I'm glad you're feeling confident. So just a little bit of that guide on the side, you know, the writing coach, I agree with you. Next slide, please. And then this one, this is the one that I was sharing earlier. This individual did an amazing job of putting the definitions, not only in the actual document, but she linked them to the Longman Dictionary of, or Longman English Dictionary for Learners. I not know if I'm using the right organization for the title, but she truly spent time understanding what those meant. So takeaways from my activity: students get a chance to self-reflect, students get a chance to ask questions to help them understand prior to the drafting stage. They, help them unpack the language. And then of course, it helps me understand as a teacher where there are areas that I can improve when I present prompts to my students. So thank you. And I look forward to hearing how you use this technique works for you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Okay, so we're going to move on to Jessica, and she'll be sharing another activity to use during the writing process focused on using models.
Sure. Thank you, Summer. I think this activity will follow nicely after Rebecca's presentation. And that is the importance of providing our students with appropriate models of what we're asking them to write. So go to the next slide, please. So I think this is important for a number of reasons. For multilingual students, the discourse structures and writing conventions of different languages really vary. So without any intervention, our multilingual students will come to the classroom and they'll often write in the rhetorical modes they're accustomed to from their first language. And then for our native speaking students, they may not have had the exposure to reading and writing in certain genres and will default to ways of writing that they're familiar to. So this is important to provide these students with models as well. And then ultimately, both groups of students don't always have the needed exposure to enough text to intuit the appropriate structure for an essay just based on the prompt alone. So this kind of builds off Rebecca's activity about unpacking the prompt with not only having them analyze the prompt, but then also giving them examples of what we might expect of them. Next slide, please. And I think when it comes down to it, all of us, presumably in this Zoom room, are expert readers and writers, and even we use models when we're being asked to produce a text that we're unfamiliar with. So even think back to like the first time that you submitted a conference proposal. You probably went and looked for one, and you know, either consciously or subconsciously were examining what ideas were included, what the structure looked like, the format, language structures, and then even what the organization that you were submitting it to, what did they seem to value? What was important ideas to them? And certainly we didn't copy these models, but they're certainly reference points and something that expert readers and writers use, and we should be supplying those for our students as well. Next slide, please. And so I think sometimes when we talk about models, instructors will say that you know, students should not be given models because they'll either just copy them, they'll get the message that there's only one right way to produce a text, and that these models might inhibit the student's creativity. But I think these are all valid points, but I think it's not the problem with giving students models. I think it's how we use them to teach writing. It's not enough to just hand students examples and say, okay, fine, make what you want of them. I think they can be used very strategically to complement writing instruction. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think models can be used most appropriately. And the first is choosing appropriate models. So certainly there's lots of examples of professional writing out there, but one of the most powerful ways to empower our students is to use student writing. So I think it's really effective to get good models from students in previous semesters. And if you're kind of concerned about copying, you can be really strategic about alternating topics so that the students are focused on kind of the genre rather than the topic. You can edit these examples for language errors, and then always obviously ask the students for permission before using their writing. I think most students are really excited to have their writing highlighted in future semesters, but they might not want their name shared. And one thing that I like to do is kind of create a mini booklet of model student writing to pass down to students from semester to semester. And then you'll always have kind of a nice reservoir of writing to draw from. And I think this serves a couple of purposes. Examples from fellow students can be highly motivating for students in future semesters. It's like, this student is so much like me. And then I also think that having lots of examples to look at gets us away from the idea that there's only one way to write this essay. It's kind of like, look at all of these ways that these students were successful in responding to this prompt. And then the other way to bring models into the classroom is to write some examples yourselves. I personally don't like to pull in a lot of student writing that I don't think is well written. I like to kind of mimic student writing to portray common mistakes and then just highlight real student writing that's well written. But it's also good for students to see some examples that can be improved. Next slide, please. So I think that these models can be used at different points in the writing process. The activity that Rebecca presented, sometimes I think it would be really useful to present a model to a student right after unpacking the prompt. And this I think is particularly useful if it's a brand new kind of writing, a genre they've never written in before, or one that's particularly difficult, like maybe you're asking them to do a resume that's new. But if it's something that they're a little bit familiar with, sometimes it can come, the analysis of a model can come after a pre-writing activity. You give students the opportunity to brainstorm their own thoughts about an assignment, and then they can compare their thoughts with the model. And then I think models can be used really intentionally during the drafting process. So you can notice when you get first drafts, maybe students are having difficulty with a particular assignment in one area, and you can intervene by sharing some successful models of that specific area of difficulty. And that can be done on a class-wide discussion, or it can be done on a one-on-one basis. And then I think it's also really effective to celebrate student successes. So after writing, once you've collected the final drafts, you can highlight models of effective writing from the class. So this, at this point in the writing process, it's probably too long to share entire essays. But if you're, pulling out like here's a really good example of a student who wrote a cohesive paragraph, or here's some examples of strong introductions. And this like celebrates writing successes, and I think it reinforces some of the things that you're trying to teach. And then you can use these examples to add to your mini booklet to, pass on from semester to semester. Next slide, please. And there's a lot of techniques that you can use to kind of systematically analyze models with your students, and these are just a few. And next slide, please. One way, certainly we want to kind of consider the essay as a whole as well as the parts. And then we also want to evaluate different models for like their effectiveness, what's well written, what's okay, what's poor. So this is just an example of a thesis statement activity where you might provide students with some guidelines of what an effective thesis statement looks like, and then have them evaluate thesis statements on the written in response to the same prompt, evaluate the thesis statements in small groups for their effectiveness, and they can talk about why a thesis statement is effective or it's not. So this would be an example of looking at a specific component of the writing process. And next slide, please. Another thing would be to use checklists that kind of highlight important parts of the assignment, and these would be developed from the prompt. Checklists are frequently just yes or no questions, and the idea would be that they would stimulate conversation beyond the yes or the no, and you could kind of discuss these parts of the model in small groups. Next slide, please. And then you can use more specific analysis questions if you would like a student to kind of walk through a specific example more and do a more close reading of it. They can be asked analysis questions that go beyond a yes or no, and ask them to kind of read for content and notice where things are located in an essay. Next slide, please. And then just a couple other strategies. If you're kind of wanting students to look at an essay as a whole and how it hangs together, one idea is to have them close read the essay in comparison to the prompt, annotate it, and then create a reverse outline. So this is like the opposite of when we would hand students an outline and say, okay, fill this in. Instead, we're empowering them to kind of understand, look at some different models and see how they're organized. And ideally, you're giving them many models for them to kind of intuit that, oh, wow, they're organized in different ways. The content's located in different places, but they've all successfully completed this assignment. And then another thing is that once you've done an analysis activity with a model, then might be a good time to draft, have them put away the models and draft in class so they have some sense of what a good essay would look like, but they're not copying too closely. Next slide, please. So I think really concluding thoughts here is that I think it's really important for students to be provided with appropriate models. But again, it's not enough to just give students the models. They really must be strategically integrated into our instruction. And we really want students to come away with the idea that, models aren't templates, they're not fill in the blanks, but they're resources that we can use to become better writers, but they're not representative of some ideal way of completing an assignment. So thank you very much. That's our last strategy.
Thank you so much. I know I'm learning a lot about things I will be using in my classes, so this is fantastic. Okay, so we're going to move into a Q&A section for our panelists. So we have some questions that we have written ahead of time, but we also can pull some from the chat. So if you have a question you'd like to ask our panelists, you can put that in the chat, and then we'll move to those after we go through the ones we have already written. Okay, so our first question is, how should feedback for English learners differ from feedback you might give to native speakers, if at all? So I'm going to ask Jose to go ahead and answer this one first, please.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that this is kind of complex when you're thinking about the idea if you're giving feedback or kind of feedback specifically to content of ideas or the way that ideas are written, as far as grammar of ideas, either collectively and looking at samples with the whole class or individually, right? Or maybe in small groups. And so one of the things that I would recommend is like that changes a little bit depending on if the feedback is focused in front of the whole class and kind of talking through different ideas or giving feedback on an individual level. So one of the things that I would really recommend is going back to the modeling idea, right? And being able to show specific examples of modeling and then give feedback to an entire class, right? Showing different examples of here is a place in this essay that's effective, or sometimes I'll use previous essays and talk about like, here are some places and evaluating the efficacy of a writer's quote integration, for example, an analysis of a quote, and what have them kind of talk about what maybe makes that area a little bit ineffective. I think that when we're thinking about feedback on an individual level, like for example, grading a paper or something like that, I try to not make it feel overwhelming. And so maybe one of the places where there's a lot of similarities is first and foremost always giving feedback for content, but then kind of thinking about how maybe some of the grammatical features can tie specifically into some of the content. So I try to front load a lot of the grammar as much as I can, kind of with like as a rhetorical strategy, right? So for example, looking at developing, talking through dependent clauses and subordination as a means of setting up a complex thesis statement, as opposed to, you know, this is where the comma goes, you know, in regards to the dependent clause. It's more like, how does a dependent clause connect to an independent clause, and what kind of complex relationship we're trying to show there, if cause and effect or contrast. And then when we move into the paper, give feedback in regards to how does your sentence structure rhetorically work to support your meaning. I also really try to, and I think this is maybe one of those places where the feedback is similar, but if I'm maybe doing a little bit more of a specific, and I'll ask students, like when I've started adapting a process of like a preliminary grade for a paper, and then kind of a closer grading that I give a paper beyond the rubric and kind of straightforward surface level feedback. What are some areas where you'd like me to pay close attention to when I'm reading your paper? Areas where you're continuing to develop, areas where you'd like us, you know, to have some more conversation or to give some additional feedback. And so in regards to focusing with the non-native English speakers in my class, a lot of times there are those emphasis on grammar or structure. And so I really try to kind of, and this is true for native speakers also, but I try to make sure that I'm focusing on maybe one or two reoccurring trends in their paper, as opposed to feeling that I'm giving overwhelming amounts of feedback, right? So I would really recommend kind of looking at like, what are some of the reoccurring things that you see happening that could directly affect meaning? And then also, what are you directly covering in class, right? Because I think sometimes that instinct to go through and maybe point out some things that haven't come out in class conversation is there, right? When we're looking at a paper, we're trying to give feedback that's meaningful, but do they have a context for the feedback that you're giving? And so I think that's also really important there.
And Nicole, did you want to add anything to this one? Oh, you're on mute.
Just that I echo a lot of what Jose said. I mean, I think it's feedback that's really purpose focused. You know, what is your intended effect on your audience? So if I do see, you know, language things, I might suggest, you know, how might this affect your audience differently if you use a different sentence structure or whatnot. I agree that multilingual, you know, the traditional feedback for multilingual is really focused on language. And so I think the short answer is no. I don't think the, you know, multilingual feedback is much different. I think native speakers and monolingual English speakers should get the same kind of feedback about, is this the most appropriate language for your purpose? I think it's a great practice. And then also focusing on, like Jose said, one at a time. You know, if you see a lot of frequent or varied errors, it is too overwhelming to see so many different areas that you need to work on. So trying to emphasize one, if we're going to focus on subject verb agreement, make sure that's the focus for the first round or for the first essay even, and recognizing that the goal is not a perfect paper. I try and tell myself that it's not my job to fix or correct. The goal is to get them to slowly, grow. So.
All right, thank you. We're going to move to question 2, and this kind of builds off what you were saying. With English learners, we often focus on language acquisition issues such as vocabulary, grammar, etc. But are there other skills that are particularly important for instructors to focus on to support English learners, such as an understanding of American academic essay structure? And I'm going to ask Jessica to answer this one, please.
Sure. I think some of this goes back to what Jose was talking about, and I think it's strategies for how you approach readings. I think most of our assignments are reading based in some extent, so it all starts with reading and building that confidence and understanding a text. So I think some of this starts with a teacher looking at a text and thinking, what assumptions does this author make about the reader's prior knowledge? And helping the students kind of activate that background knowledge that they already have, and then meeting them part way with some additional context that they would need to understand the text. And I think that it's really, it mentions vocabulary in here, but I think what's important about vocabulary instruction is teaching it in the context of reading. So whenever you give a student a new reading, you're looking at what vocabulary words do they absolutely need to know to understand this text. And then also what vocabulary can we pull from the academic word list to teach explicitly, because this kind of introducing new vocabulary in the context of a reading and a new topic will work kind of synergistically to improve both their reading and their writing. So I think it's kind of this previewing vocabulary to help them understand the text, but also understanding that will also improve their writing and their future encounters with reading. And so to kind of be very systematic and deliberate about pulling that vocabulary out before having them read. And I think it's a little bit different than just having discrete vocabulary lists that you introduced out of context. So I think that's really the biggest one. And then I also think kind of away from the academic issues is helping connect EL students to campus resources. That's a big part of the learning experience as well. Many of them don't understand how much help they can get from like the Learning Center, the importance of visiting a counselor. So kind of embedding those exposures into your class, I think are really important for their long-term success in the course, but also at the college and beyond.
Thank you. Rebecca, did you want to add to that one?
I think actually I thought that a point that Jessica brought up in her presentation was a valuable one, and that is just have class discussions about contrastive rhetoric. So let me unpack what that is. And that is those writing conventions that vary widely from different cultures, and discuss those as traditional ways of writing, because one of the things to stress is that they're not better. They're just different. And then do some of that modeling, right? You, look for some of those types of writing that have been translated from other cultures into English, and show the difference between this is one that's linearly aligned, thesis and support, versus one that is more circular, or one in which the writer puts the main idea at the end. And just have a frank discussion with students. This is the preferred method of what a reader in higher ed in the United States is expecting, and answer questions that they have, because they have curiosity about why we have these cultural differences, and it just opens up a discussion about accepting different cultures and styles of writing. And I think that's important too, because then you understand that the structure of the academic essay is another cultural convention that we follow.
Thank you. Okay, our next question. I have had students who seem to do pretty well with reading comprehension and writing when they work on their own, but they seem to struggle with classroom discussion because they struggle with oral communication and listening comprehension. Are there strategies you can share to support these students? And I'll ask Jose to answer that one.
Yeah, I think, setting up situations where some of the work that they're doing, an ability to be able to demonstrate that reading comprehension, like either in classroom discussion or maybe in small groups, is kind of try to create low stakes type situations. So I try to break up classes in different varying groups a lot of times. I notice that, and that's not just true of non-native English speakers, but sometimes it is that you'll see there'll be a lot of like really rich conversation happening in like these kind of small pocket groups, and then as soon as you come back together, be like, okay, so let's kind of like report out on what happened, and it's just like everyone's quiet, right? And so I think that like being able to like create some low stakes environment where people can share out and small groups is really beneficial for that, can be really helpful. I also think that like one of the other ways of thinking about classroom discussion is not necessarily just like, are you able to contribute to a group conversation by simply talking in the group conversation, right? So a lot of times I try to use some different multimodal things. So maybe it's like creating like for example, in my 1A this last week, we were analyzing some different arguments and looking at like writers' rhetorical strategies that they discovered on their own, and then like the logic of the arguments that they had discovered on a topic that they chose. And then it was like people in the group were kind of in charge of different things. So some people were like looking through the articles for, logical fallacies, and someone was in charge of like kind of creating some Google slides. And so I think like what starts to happen pretty organically in that context is that like conversation starts to happen, but it's not necessarily like, what did you think about this specific area? But all of those things boost comprehension, right? So if you're the person who's like creating the slides and someone's like, oh, look on this page right here, and you're doing that transfer of like reading something and paraphrasing it, or identifying a key area of the text that can be used to support your claim on an effective use of rhetoric, like that can work really well. And so I think like using those as kind of like almost like icebreakers into the larger conversation, then typically later on, I'll notice a transfer, right? Where people who are engaged in some of those smaller conversations start to come out of their shells a little bit more and feel more comfortable in an environment having larger discussion than maybe they would have previously, had they not had the opportunity to talk with people in groups.
Okay, thank you. Jessica, did you want to add to that one?
Sure, yeah, I'll echo a lot of what Jose said, just that I think when you give students practice and planning time, their answers will be better. They'll have greater fluency and increased confidence. So kind of some of the things he was saying about having the students either work in small groups to brainstorm the ideas first, or maybe even just giving them time to write down their ideas first, having them post on a discussion board about an idea before you talk about it in class. Just lots of exposure gives them some practice and more confidence. And sometimes if you as a teacher know that you're going to go through systematically and ask everybody to read one of the questions, or you can tell them ahead of time, I'm going to ask you to do number 4 so that they know like, okay, this is the one that I really have to prepare for. This is the one that I need to write down some notes about. And then I think in terms of listening comprehension, that gets tricky too, because you're trying to fit a lot of content into the class. You want to get through as much as possible. So sometimes our pace can get fast and students can miss things. So I would say to kind of alleviate this is to give students kind of multiple ways to access meetings. So if there's something really important, you don't want the only way that they can get that information to be that you said it aloud once at the end of class. It needs to be written down as part of the assignment. It needs to be communicated regularly in different forms posted on the class website. And then I think is also to be conscious when you're presenting information to class is thinking of different ways that you can describe the same thing. So maybe it's certain vocabulary words that they're just stuck on and they don't know what something means, is to kind of paraphrase and talk about that in different ways. And I think it's also helpful if you give them kind of informal check-in time with classmates. At our college, we have a kind of a language lab for multilingual students. And I think the students get a lot from informally checking in with each other. Like, well, when did she say this was due? Like, what did you understand about this? So even having students kind of check in informally with each other and then kind of come back with questions if it seems like they're in disagreement with what you had said. So those are just a couple suggestions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. And then our next question. In my composition class, I use the Purdue OWL in place of a writer's handbook. Are there additional resources that might be helpful to have in my toolbox for English learners in my composition classes. And I will ask Rebecca to answer this one.
Sure, thank you, Summer. So I'm dropping in the chat an OER that was developed by ESL faculty. And this OER is called Reading, Writing, Research, and Reasoning, an Advanced ESL Text. And it was created by two colleagues of ours, Gabe Weiner and Elizabeth Waddell from Berkeley City and Laney College. And I have found this to be a wonderful resource because I simply give a student feedback during conferences. Hey, maybe we should address the way in which you are working with parallel structure. Oh, what is that? And so then I just pull up the OER, and the link I give them to them at the beginning of the semester, then they open it and we go together and we look at parallel structure in the context of writing. So it isn't just go figure out parallel structure as a grammar point, but as Jose explained, we need to make sure we're using grammar in the context of writing. And so the OER, again, is one of the resources that I've been using quite a lot. And then the name of the dictionary that I was trying to convey, and I could not get the right word order, is the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English. And that is an English learner's dictionary. I'm putting the link in the chat as well. And essentially this dictionary is helpful because the meaning of some of the words are defined in simple language. So I know sometimes when we have a language learner, and they say, well, what does this mean? And you explain it, or they look it up on their own. The definition has words that they don't know, right? So a learner's dictionary is important as a tool to offer your students. And again, I give my students the link, they can log in, they can check out whatever meaning. And what's cool about the learner's dictionary, it also has a little kind of like the thermometer of academic and important words. And so they'll see whether it has the 3 little red circles all completed or all filled out, I should say. And that means that's a really important academic word versus 1 little circle filled out. So that it is not an academic word that we use quite a lot. So it gives them a lot of meaning. And again, meaning they understand. It gives them grammar characteristics. So for example, when there's a noun, it explains whether the noun is countable or non-countable. So again, just additional language support and grammar and context resources that can help them. And then also if you get stuck, like I do, with explaining something, we can refer to the text together and then help them understand the answer as a team. Those are 2 that I have.
Nicole, did you want to add one?
Yeah, I also really like learners' dictionaries. I think they're wonderful resources, and I'm excited about this OER. So thank you for sharing that, Rebecca. The other one I would add is to know your databases too. So the database that we use is the Opposing Viewpoints, and I think it's pretty standard in databases at schools, but the Opposing Viewpoints will sometimes gloss different articles and then, read the articles out loud, translate sometimes different areas of the articles. And so I think it's really helpful to find databases in your own school library that have these kind of extra tools to help students read articles, because that's kind of the best place to get that authentic language too. And you can't pay for New York Times, so it's nice to have those through the school. Another one I would recommend too is using for more advanced students who are really focused on vocabulary. I'm sure you get that with multilingual, but how can I learn more vocabulary? I like to share the wordandphrase.info. It's the corpus that students can actually take a chunk of text, and I'll do it too in order to kind of pick out the vocabulary I want to find or focus on in class. And they can copy and paste, a paragraph or an entire article, and it'll separate it out by frequency, so they can see based on corpus data what vocabulary is going to be more high frequency or low frequency, and start focusing on some of the more academic words that way as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, before we move into our breakout rooms, we had 2 questions in the chat, but about the same topic. So what is your opinion on timed essays? Dr. Weber says, I had a really strong student progress to English 101. I reconnected with her to see how she was doing, and her biggest issue was the timed writing. I don't personally see the benefit of timed writing, since I find that in the real world, we don't do timed writings. We tend to have a period to write something prior to submitting thoughts. And then just to add to that, that students tend to have a lot of anxiety. Some colleges have a required timed final exam. So Rebecca?
Thank you, Summer. So yeah, we address timed writing in my class as another skill to learn. So I separated a little bit because we want to teach them that it is a separate skill to draw all the planning that goes with writing, and the organization and the revision and the editing have to occur in a crunch of time. And so we address it as a separate skill. And this is where I tell them those, 5-paragraph essays that some of you have learned, that is what you can pull into your framework as you're thinking of organizing this essay to help you with the organization, right? And so I just head on tell them it is a different skill, because I think what you're asking a language learner to do at this point is to really go out of that reflection stage to check for meaning and just focus on production, that I think all of us would struggle if we are already nervous about the time. So I think giving them a clear guideline that it's a different skill. It is not the same as process writing, because the process is happening in 10 minutes, right? And so having the conversations about it being a different skill and coming in and teaching them, here's where you can use your 5-paragraph essay instruction, and those rules of the thesis needs to fit in the last paragraph, the last line of your introduction paragraph. Those are the kinds of things that we address in the class to help them, because we don't do them in our class, but they tell me it happens in other classes. So they ask me, how do I approach it? And that's where I tell them it's a different, skill set, and we need to prepare for it in the way, as I just mentioned, reach out for the familiar things that you have, that That's one advice.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to go ahead and move to our breakout room. So we wanted to give you all time to kind of think through how you are supporting language learners. So I know we're all doing this in our classroom, so we wanted to kind of create a resource to share with each other in a small group and then with the whole group. I said 15 minutes and maybe more like 12-ish because we went a little bit longer, but that's okay. So there is a Padlet that you will use. So Rebecca, you can share that link in the chat for me. And then there's a QR code here if you'd like to get it that way. So in your breakout room, I want you to answer the following prompt, and I will drop this in the chat too. Each person in your group should share one strategy from their composition classroom that they think is particularly important for supporting English learners, and discuss why that strategy is so impactful. And we'd like you to also share that on the Padlet so we can kind of have a group of resources for the group to share. So let me go ahead and stop sharing for a second and get you into breakout rooms. Okay. All right, here you go.
Do we go too?
No. So we're gonna look at the Padlet as it happens, and then see. We'll just have a few minutes at the end. We went kind of longer, which is totally fine. But if there's any strategies on the Padlet that you want to highlight. All right, so thank you, those of you who stuck it out to the end here. We see our crowd dwindling a little bit. One of the presenters pointed out it is Friday before Halloween, so those of us with kids might have things happening. My kids are old, so I forgot. But,
I
okay,
have stuff happening,
yes.
we're not that old yet, right?
Okay, okay. All right, so we are just going to share a couple of the strategies. Nicole, did you want to go ahead?
I just really love looking at all the strategies you presented. Obviously, I love sentence level grammar, and so I really like the one with the sentence focus and giving structure to ground their writing on. I think that's a wonderful way to set all students up for success in their writing. It's great.
And then Jose, do you want to share one?
Yeah, I like the small wins. Just philosophically, I think for a class is really important, right? For all students, but just this idea of like, especially if those small wins kind of focus on that backwards design idea, and then students have that real strong buy-in to like the different activities that we're working on in class, ultimately are leading up to like, I would, change that idea of like, you're doing the heavy lifting now. So when you write your essay, you've already done a lot of the work that goes into that process. So I think that philosophy of small wins is really nice.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for being here on the Friday afternoon. I know it was super informative for me. I learned a lot that I will be using in my own classes. I want to thank our panelists for sharing your expertise. I really appreciate it. As I mentioned in the beginning, if you would like to know more about any of these programs, you can check out the publication. There's links to old webinars in there as well if you'd like to learn more. And we will be sharing the recording and the slides of this on the CAP website's publication page in the next few days. So thank you all. I hope you have a great weekend. And
I have a question.
Sure.
Will we be getting verification that we attended the webinar? Is there some kind of email that I can get?
Not formally, but like if you want to send an email to the CAP Gmail account, I can just say, yes, Diane was here, if that works.
Okay, so should I request it from you or from?
Yeah, you can just email me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you
all.
all.
It was wonderful, very helpful.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Okay.